One.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to this Child Safety During COVID-19 webinar, hosted by YACVIC and delivered by the lovely Mandy from Childwise. I would like to begin by welcoming you all. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting today. I'm down in sunny Boomerang country, down towards Frankston and Bayside. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and note that sovereignty was never ceded. I'd like to extend my respect to anybody who identifies as Aboriginal on the webinar here today. And I would like to welcome everybody from across the many areas that you're in. The joy of webinars is that we cut across the state, potentially across the country. And so I'd like to ask anybody that would like to use the chat feature in Zoom to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which they sit today. It's quite a nice little piece of culture that's come out of this Zoom era. If you would like to acknowledge country where you are, please feel free to do that.
Got my voice here?
And I'll just ask that everybody keeps themselves on mute if they can. It just helps with the sound as well. The last thing I wanted to do around acknowledging the country and traditional owners of the land was just make reference to Bunjil. So this wonderful piece of participatory art was created at the Koori Youth Summit in 2017. It sits in the YACVIC office, the unused YACVIC office in the CBD right now. And those feathers there were created and added by participants talking about their hopes and their dreams at the Koori Youth Summit in 2017. Now, Bunjil's law states that it's quite simply that people care for country and people care for the children. And I think it's a really, really great way for us to check in with where we're all at and the purpose of the webinar today. It sets the scene for the conversations we're going to be having. So my name is Sam. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Participation and Development Coordinator here at YACVIC. I'm going to do a quick spiel to introduce everyone to the webinar and then hand over to Mandy from Childwise. There's a few YACVIC staff on the webinar today. We've got Thomas, our comms media manager, taking care of the live stream through Facebook. So thanks to Thomas for being here. A big shout out to Derm Ryan, who is the YACVIC Rural Manager, who's going to be keeping an eye on the chat room. And he'll ask those questions that come up later after Mandy's webinar. After her presentation, he'll be posing those questions to Mandy, and I'll also get involved in that as well. My role at YACVIC spans across participation and development of the sector, and I'm also the one of the child safe officers alongside Ryan. So you're in relatively good hands, I hope. I wanted to just introduce Mandy as well. And so Mandy's a senior advisor at Childwise. She's been at Childwise for 5 years now, and she brings with her a wealth of experience from across the sector, and she has been involved in training, crisis management, event management, recruitment, project management, and a variety of volunteer roles. So she works in consultation and training in her role at Childwise, and we're very lucky to have her here today. So what we'll do is hand over to Mandy in just a moment. You will be able to use the chat feature to comment on the things that Mandy's talking about, and to be able to share your questions that will be identified and posed to Mandy at the end of her presentation. Now, we're not going to have time to hear every single question, and so some of them might be joined together, and we may not have the chance to get to all of them. But our aim is to collate those after the webinar. So using the chat feature is a really important task for you today, and we're going to collate those questions afterwards and try and find some answers for you and share those through our website and by follow-up email with you over the coming weeks. So don't be shy in asking those questions and commenting. If you'd like to share any resources that you have found useful during the last few weeks, and adapting to COVID-19 in relation to child safety and online child safety specifically, please feel free to use the chat to do that as well. And all I ask is that you play nicely. Remember that we're all here in challenging circumstances. I'm sure many of you will be juggling an awful lot in your homes at the moment. And so let's go kindly on each other. If there are any tech failures, we'll try and approach them with a smile as well. What I might do before I just throw to Mandy is just ask Thomas to share the results of the poll, the welcome poll. Is that all right for you to do that, Thomas?
I will just do that now. Hopefully that's showing up on your screens.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. So we've got a majority from youth services, but we do have a spread across the community sector as well. So it's great to have you all here. We had over 300 people register for this webinar, which has taken us a little bit by surprise, and we're really excited to have so many new people to YACVIC join us today. My role is service delivery or support work. So yeah, a lot of people in frontline delivery, and then a few in management, senior leadership and compliance. It's good for us to know, and particularly useful for Mandy to know. The majority are working with 12 to 17-year-olds. 18 to 24 is a high proportion too, which is to be expected through a YACVIC presentation. And then I am the Child Safe Officer or part of a Child Safe working group. Great, okay, that's fantastic to know as well. And the icebreaker at the end there, longing for the weekend, was the most popular. A lot of people are multitasking. Of course, you do you today. I'd encourage you to close down those extra apps and turn your emails off and concentrate. But obviously, you are your own boss and you take care of yourself for the next 50 minutes or so. So unless there's any questions from Mandy or Derm before we kick off, I will happily pass over to Mandy and I will sit back and listen. Thanks so much, Mandy.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen, everyone. Thanks for that. I am also multitasking, and I've sent my husband out with the kids so that I don't have to deal with them while I'm trying to present, because that just would not work. Okay, let's get my slides up, everyone. Okay, see my slides? We all good? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so thanks, Sam, and thanks, YACVIC, for having me today. And I am really looking forward to, I guess, spending the next sort of 20 minutes or so chatting about moving online and what that means for our organisations as we adapt. And I really want to acknowledge you, all of you. I think lots of people in the industry that you're in are working harder than you ever have before. We might have friends or family that have lost their jobs or have less to do, but everyone I speak who's working with children and young people and families in any capacity is pretty much slammed at the moment. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this today and understand that it is a really important topic. I'm just seeing if that's a delay or why my slide didn't change pages. Sometimes I'm having a little bit of a glitch, so hang on with me while okay, all good. I do just want to remind you that obviously as we go through, I'm talking about child abuse. So that can be a difficult topic for people. If you do have children in earshot, really the language I'm using, this isn't a conversation that should be had in front of children. So if possible, put your headset on or move places if that's possible. And just know that obviously some of the things I talk about might be triggering or difficult for you. So if you need to switch off, the slides will be sent around later. And obviously on the side, we've got a couple of phone numbers too. So just make sure you do take care of yourself as we go through. Okay, so we're talking about a couple of things on the slide. Before we get right into it, I do want to sort of just make sure you know that I'm not an IT expert. My husband kind of laughs that I'm the one doing this topic. We're not technical experts, we're not lawyers, we're not privacy experts, we're not doctors, we're not health experts. So we're looking at this really from the child safe angle. So you might come through with some questions that aren't really questions that I can answer, but I might be able to direct you in the right way. I think I'm going to be spending time talking about the risks about going online, but I want us to also understand that We're not against kids being online. Young people, there's great things there. There's great ways to learn, to communicate, to connect, and the internet's not going away. So we just need to work out how we can work with what we have and get better at it with lots of things. I think children and young people are more accustomed and feel safer to areas, and it's the adults that kind of need to get on board a little bit quicker. Having said that, I think we also need to acknowledge the myth that all young people know what to do online. Some kids don't have the experience, and whether that's the fact that their family doesn't have a device or they just don't like it. There was a digital inclusion study on Australia's response to COVID-19, and that showed that 2.5 million Australians don't have access to the internet. So even as we're talking about moving online, I want you to also be thinking about what are we doing with the young people that we can't connect with because they're not online. Okay, so Principle 8, I know the majority of people listening today are in Victoria, so most of you are comfortable with the Victorian Child Safe Standards and they've been around for a while, but the national principles have now been endorsed and we're going to start hearing that language in Victoria a bit more. So Principle 8, which is the one that really is what we're talking about in this session, physical and online environments promote safety and well-being while minimising the opportunity for children and young people to be harmed. So this is pretty clear language that we do have a responsibility to be looking after kids in this area. But of course, this is one of 10 principles and they all work together to keep kids safe. It's not just one thing. And for me, I'm really big on making sure we've got a really strong child safe culture. If your organisation doesn't already have a safe child safe culture, this step will be even harder. So we kind of need to go back and start there. Is it something that you think in your organisation is already pretty strong? Do you think your leadership's on board? Do you have a really good working group? Do you have someone who can add a tech element to it now that you're thinking about this? Or are you kind of in the organisation where everyone thinks that this is Serena's job or Tom's job or just the child safe officer? It's really important that everyone sees this as a group responsibility and not just one person. I think also maybe now's a good time to be looking at your child safe working group. Some organisations have had a working group for 2 or 3 years now, and maybe this is the time to think, well, maybe we need some new people, maybe we need someone with some tech skills, maybe it's about time we've got the voice of young people on our working group, the voice of parents on our working group. Now, they might not come to every meeting, but it might be a way forward to help with these kinds of things. So as we talk through, I'm going to give you lots of things to think about and take away and talk with your team. All right, so we've got to start with a risk assessment. And by now you've probably already worked out what parts of your business are going online and what parts might not be going online, but you're still working out how to do that. So I think fundamentally the number one is you should already have risk protocols in place and you need to run these new things just through your normal risk protocols and work out how you're going to manage them. And hopefully you do that before you end up in a position like this, so that you know what to do to make sure that you don't sort of end up somewhere quite precarious. So I think it's important to know that as an organisation, you have a duty of care in whatever capacity it is that you're connecting with children, with young people. So if you are having a session, whether it's one-on-one, twos, a group, and a child injures themselves, you might be facilitating a sports class, you might be stretching, a child might be self-harming. There might be different ways that you see a child's in danger. What are you going to do? Do you have the phone number to call emergency if it's that serious and know the address of where that child is to be able to give them that address? Now, yes, of course, we're hoping that mum and dad are in that house, but we know that's not always true. But they could be in another room with a headset on and not know what's going on. So do you have a written procedure around that? Are your staff and volunteers really clear about what they would need to do in circumstances like that? We also need to look at internal risks and external risks. Now, organisations are usually much better at looking at external risks than thinking about the harm that could be caused from within. So what we often see is organisations haven't necessarily thought because no one likes to think that there could be a perpetrator of harm within their organisation. A lot of you, I'm sure, are aware of the Royal Commission, and that was into institutionalisation abuse. It wasn't into abuse that occurred in a family. It was abuse caused by organisations. So we need to make sure we've thought about grooming. Again, I know that most of you know that grooming is the creation of a relationship to then sexually abuse a child. And that creation of that relationship, that grooming, is in itself a crime. So we need to be conscious of that as we move to online, that without visibility, that we're not making it easier for people in positions of power and trust to get closer to a child, to prey on them and cause them harm. So we need to think about what we're going to do to mitigate some of those risks. And I think when we're thinking about platforms, we need to think about what are we doing, where are we going, how old are our users. So some of the people we work with might be 6 or 7, some might be 15, and they're all different ages. If you think, say, of TikTok as an example, I had a conversation with a group we were working with that wanted to use TikTok to work with their young people because they knew all the kids were on there already. And I get that. I can see how that makes sense. But TikTok is a site where you don't need to register. You can just view information on there. You can copy it, you can save it to your own device, you can comment on it. So if you go to TikTok, you'll see there's lots of nasty comments on young kids' videos, whether it's talking about their appearance or things that they would like to do to them, not very nice things. And as an organisation, you're exposing them to that risk if you're putting the two together, if you're saying that you sort of give it approval by working on that area. If you do have social media groups, if you are creating spaces, then really you want to try and make sure that there's at least 2 adults that have oversight in that area. Think about maybe someone who's not front facing with the kids so that they can be someone who has a little bit more oversight and watch out for any unusual communication that's happening. We need to make sure that we've got really strong professional boundaries when we're moving online. If we're in our homes, most of us naturally feel a bit more like ourselves, a bit more us. So we're just a bit more relaxed, and it's kind of easy to have some boundary creep, doing some things that we wouldn't naturally or normally do. So we wouldn't want people to sort of be showing people around their house and opening all their cupboards and doing things like that. It just creates a relationship that's a little bit strange. I also, while we're here, just wanted to mention the Australian Centre to Counter, I always get the name wrong, Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, the ACCCE. Last year, they had 17,000 reports. So that's before the pandemic. They're part of the Department of Home Affairs and led by the AFP as well. And they've seen a massive spike in online abuse since we've all been in lockdown. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through as well. So one of the early things that we should be looking at is our code of conduct. What have we already got in place that might be telling us the kinds of things we should be doing as we move online? Is it fit for purpose, and can we change it? So lots of big organisations, changing documents takes ages. So you might want to come up with a guiding document, a way to change behaviour, an online guide, basically, something that can help early on. Think about what do our young people, what do our staff, what do our parents need to know to help us move online quickly and easily and safely. And ideally you work with them to come up with this. This isn't just something that the adults come up with. We all work collaboratively to come up with something to do. And I guess think about questions like, are we okay with our facilitators, our leaders, talking to young people 24/7? Can they do it on Saturdays or Sundays or Fridays? Do we need to put some parameters around it? Should it only be in session times when we've got scheduled times, or could it be within an hour or two, or sort of 9 to 5? What is it to make it easier so that we don't have young people emailing and connecting it at midnight? What about Fortnite, Minecraft, those kinds of games? Would we be okay with people playing those, or do we need a really black and white answer in our new document about these things not really being appropriate? Making sure when we communicate with young people, if we're using email, it's our work email address. It's not our personal email address. And then all of these things that I'm talking about making sure that the young people know these rules. They are the ones that need to sort of say the big person broke the rules, and they can't do that if they don't know what the rules are. They need to be really clear, and the mums and dads do as well, and carers need to know what's going on. And so we need to communicate all of that to everyone that we work with. And I think now with that in mind, we need to make sure that we've got a really child-friendly, youth-friendly reporting process. And lots of organisations we work with, this has been a bit that they found difficult. They've got a process for complaints, for feedback, for review, but it's really adult-centric. It uses adult words. It's not friendly. It's not easy. It's not accessible. Kids need lots of different pathways to be able to do this. So making sure that they have ways. And if you think about normally, if you're in a rec centre and you're running a session, if a child didn't like something, they could go see a manager. But what can they do now? If a facilitator is doing something inappropriate, do those young people have another way to contact the organisation, or do they only have the details of the person that they're working really closely with? And I think communicating these messages to children and young people isn't something we do once. We do it many times. It becomes something that becomes natural in our modelling and our communication, and we just need constant reminders for everyone as well. So as we go through our documents, lots of you might already have a social media policy or an IT policy or something like that. Some of the things I spoke about just now might be in that document rather than this one, and that's fine, so long as it's written sort of somewhere. It needs to be really clear about what your inappropriate and appropriate behaviour is, and not just saying inappropriate or appropriate, because we all have different ideas about what those two words mean. When we think about what we are talking about, make sure you're clear to your staff and your volunteers that it's anything that connects to the internet. So that could be things like smartphones, tablets, internet, laptops, computers, and think about your wording around work devices and home devices. It's fairly standard that we want everyone to be working on work devices rather than personal devices, but we know at the current climate that's not necessarily what's happening, because people didn't have a computer or something to take home when we went into lockdown. The eSafety Commissioner, I'm just going to read this, reminds us that we should respect confidentiality and privacy by always seeking consent from the young person and their parents or carers prior to publishing their information online. And that information could be their name, a photo, a video, samples of their work, or anything that identifies them. So we need to make sure we've got consent in place as well. If you're a larger organisation and you run lots of different programs, or if you run across sites, it's probably a good idea to make a checklist or something like that, that your different teams can translate to what they need for their group. Whoops, went too fast. Sorry, guys. So being online, well, and again, we need to look at what we're doing, go back to your documents and work out what you need to upskill yourself in. Talk to your young people. What are they using? Where already are they online? Look at those things, work out what are the strengths of those platforms, what are the pitfalls, so that you can help them navigate. I think young people, lots of them don't necessarily see risk in the same way that we do. So helping them understand what sort of some of the risks could be. Only about 50%, I think there was a new study from eSafety this week, which was 52% of parents talk to their kids about this. And I know a lot of us kind of think it should be a responsibility of a family, but when we know it's not, then we can be better to help kids sort of understand some of these things. So think about your organisation. What time have you spent teaching your staff and your volunteers about cyber safety, whether it's online bullying, whether it's phishing, whether it's scams, whether it's any of the things that kids can find online, which there's hate material, there's racism, there's information about suicide, there's lots of different things there. What do your staff need to know to be better? And then think about what you can put in place to upskill your staff. And again, you're not going to do that all in one day. This whole thing has come really fast for us, and we can't be expected to do everything really quickly, but just do sort of what we can. Okay, I think I just want to make it clear too that when we talk about grooming and online behaviour, that often we might think that's something that happens to really little kids. And while it does happen in primary age, definitely, teenagers are not immune to this. There's many stories where A teenager might be approached by someone else who looks like a teenager. They've taken a picture off the internet and said, you know, can you show me a picture of your penis? And this picture is allegedly coming from a very attractive 18-year-old, and, you know, it's not. So that's a really common scenario. Kids are pretending to be other people. Friends are pretending to be other people. People are pretending to be celebrities. There's lots of different things that are happening. And ECPAT, Ending Child Prostitution in Asian Tourism, they've seen an increase in the number of attempts to access illegal sites, an increase in the number of reports to police, and many conversations between offenders on the dark web about the new opportunities to meet young people online. And the AFP have confirmed that in Australia as well. I've just popped up some questions. I'm going to move through them because we don't really have time to go through them today. I'm running behind, but you will have these here. So these are things that you might be able to talk to young people about, or translate these and give these to your parents, so that parents can and carers and families can talk to people about. I guess moving safely to live streaming, telling everyone to think about what they're doing, what's in their background. So again, in our houses, they're just so normal to us, we don't look, but you might have pictures of drunken you at your bucks night or your hens night, photos of you in not great clothing, or swear words, or different things in your background that you don't even notice. And also mention that to your families, because they are screening back to you in many areas as well. Talk to kids about what they can share and what they can't share, what's private, what's not private, and think about recording. We would, recommend not recording, in almost all circumstances. And things like in the background, there might be an address on a parcel, there might be a school uniform that you can see, there might be out a window, a really obvious landmark that everybody knows. So that gives online offenders more information about where the child and young person is, and more avenues to talk to them. But also, if there are custody disputes or family violence matters, people are easy to find, children, and that kind of thing as well. All right, I'm going to skip through there because we're running a little behind. Think about a group agreement. I think this is really important, that everybody comes up working with your young people to come up with what should be in a group agreement, and make sure you've got it in writing, which might be online. And think about all those things that I've mentioned, making sure we've got the right addresses, contact times, and parents know that kind of thing as well. Some of the things that we've talked about here are the different bits and pieces, but also, what are your consequences? So if a young person does sneakily video your session and then turns the facilitator into a TikTok meme or a Facebook meme about how naughty they are, or how ugly they are, or how beautiful they are, what are your consequences? We need to be really clear on the rights and responsibilities for young people as well in the group. I just wanted to click on here too. This is the Internet Watch Foundation annual report that came out last week. And it shows that the biggest images are of 11 to 13-year-olds. In recent years, a lot of them are self-generated. The International Watch Foundation, when they're looking at these to remove them from the internet, it's 3 out of every 4 images that are self-generated. So that means made at home or by people. And for the analysts themselves, that means that they're removing 118 images a day. So that's just some stats that might be worth, and I've got the report link there. It's a very lengthy document with lots of different interesting information in it. On the left-hand side there, that's an article yesterday that was in The Guardian. So in 2019, there was an average of 670 reports per month, and it's increased by 37% up to now. And the ACCCE, so over the 6 months, there's been a 123% increase. So 776 reports up to 1,731. So that's hugely significant. We Protect on the right-hand side is another organisation who've just produced another document just this morning. So it might be yesterday because it was in the UK. Between February 20 and March 20, so just in 1 month, 200% increase in known child sexual abuse forums linking. And also in the UK, there's a Get Help organisation with people who want help to stop looking at these images and that's increased 41% and a whole lot of new users. So it's definitely something that is increasing out there that we need to be aware of. And online groomers are looking for children who are up late at night using devices at the wrong time. A lot of swearing in their communication as well when they're looking for children to target. Really looking at well-being, making sure, especially in these circumstances, that while for a lot of us we're a bit more relaxed and chilled out at home, for a lot of children and young people, their home is not a safe place for them to be in. So being really mindful of that, and that we need to be looking for the signs of distress, for violence, for abuse, for harm. In fact, your contact with a young person might be the only healthy contact they have all day. You might be the only safe eyes, not only on that young person, but on the whole family. You might be the person that's noticing. So I guess we need to think about what we can do, and do our team know enough about what they should be looking out for. I think your role to connect with your young person is really, really important at the moment. So to continue those sort of positive connections, those healthy connections, enabling spaces, whether it's one-on-one with you or peer-to-peer connections in a really safe way. There has been increases in self-harm, mental health, and I'm sure none of this is new to you. Well, there's a lot of it in the paper at the moment that the mental health area is increasing significantly. And people talk about what are we going to do when we go back, because the system wasn't exactly perfect before this, with a lot of increase of people going to be needing assistance afterwards. We've definitely had some calls about what should we do if someone is on the phone with us and talking about suicide. And I think that's a really difficult one. I think some of you probably already have skills in this area and could put in some additional information for us. But also remember that most of our phones, you have the ability to add people to your call. So that might be that you're adding your manager. It might be that you're calling in a CAT team, a crisis and emergency team, or the police or someone else to help you facilitate that conversation, and use all of your skills at engaging young people to try and keep them on the phone. And if you don't know where they are, to try and get as much information as you can. I think spotting the signs, and if you look through this list, it's not a very long list, and there are hundreds of other things that we could see that might indicate abuse. But some of these things here might just indicate mental health issues, not necessarily abuse, but that children and adults, certainly, I don't know about you, but I've had a roller coaster of emotions over the last 8 weeks, and good days and bad days. But it's everyone's responsibility to prevent harm, and hopefully your staff are across that. There's been a spike in family violence. That might be an area that you want to increase knowledge in your staff, and remember that reporting hasn't changed at all. The obligations are exactly the same as they were, but it might be harder to notice without all of the same cues. Reporting is difficult for most people. It's not something that we naturally want to do, but it's really important at the moment that we do. You hold your one little jigsaw piece about what's going on in a situation, and that might be the final piece they need to put the puzzle together and work out that harm is occurring. So I do urge you to report under all of your normal areas, and also report to the E-Safety Commissioner. You can report to them directly. Also, for those of you who work in communities with a different language, the E-Safety Commission has translated lots of their information into about 25 different languages. So you might be able to find some helpful things there to share with your families. And lastly, this is from the National Youth Agency in the UK. Therefore, young people need to be treated fairly and equally, with their voices heard and included in decision making. Without youth clubs and youth workers, far too many young people go unseen and unheard. Through the power of peer education and volunteering, social action, young people can be engaged to become part of the solution during the pandemic and its aftermath. So I think, and again, they've written a big document about what's going on in the UK with young people that might be interesting to you. But remembering that young people have a voice and they have the right to be safe and the right to be heard. And with that, let's open up to some questions.
Great, thank you so much, Mandy. That was a fantastic presentation on all of the considerations that we need to go through, and a great process for us all to follow as well. So thanks so much for giving up your time. Derm, we put out an email asking people to send through questions in advance, and I know you've been monitoring chat and probably had private conversations with people through chat. Have you got any questions that you could pose to Mandy? And I'm happy to jump in as well from the work that I do in the Code of Ethical Practice and the Child Safe Officer role at YACVIC.
Great. I do have a couple of questions that have been posted here. So thanks very much, Mandy. Great presentation, incredibly comprehensive. The first question, and I will post them as I read them out into the chat function. And the first question is, I'm using a breakout room in Zoom. What are the considerations I need to consider in relationship to child safety?
Okay. I think Zoom, as some of you know, has breakout rooms. So that means we can, in a big session like we are now, and then we can split into smaller ones. And I think the first thing is think about what would you do if it was physical rooms. So whether you're a school teacher in a classroom, whether you're at a rec centre or wherever you are, I think naturally there's quite often small groups that happen. You're not necessarily with children one-on-one all the time. So I think that it would be okay in most cases. But again, what are your group rules? What's the behaviour? The young people know that the facilitator can zoom in and out of those rooms, so they will be coming in to watch. I heard a funny story yesterday of someone went into a session, and when they got there, all the kids had put up their animals, so the animals were on the screen instead of the kids. So there's lots of pranking going on, but I think it's okay to be doing that kind of thing, so long as you've done your risk assessment.
That's fantastic, and it's great that humour is, the great equaliser in these situations.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything to that, Sam?
No, not really. I think Mandy's given a great answer there. I think one of the things that we always consider in the work that we do at YACVIC is, can we have facilitators in each of those breakout rooms? So in exactly as Mandy said, what would you do in real life if you're all in a room together and you might have tabletop discussions? Those people are still in the room with the facilitator, and so there is a significant difference between creating those breakout rooms in Zoom, where there is complete privacy with that group. And so we do need to be thinking through, particularly for those that are under 18, when we're thinking about children, how do we maintain that safety for them? And so placing facilitators in those groups can be great. We've posted up a link to our e-safety resource, which is a very simple collation, crowdsourced collation of online links and resources. One of the ones in there is a great sharing from the organisation Batir, who have translated their in-person training workshops to an online delivery, and they talk through a lot of the considerations that they went through to make their workshops safe to be done online. And so that's a really great case study that's happened over the last few weeks that they're sharing with the sector. So I'd urge everyone to check out that e-safety resource. We'll post it again in the chat, and we'll make sure it's sent out to you afterwards as well.
And I also have a stack of resources at the end of the presentation, so I haven't shown you, but there's a bunch there too that might be some interesting and helpful ones.
Just to end that, I recently heard of a peer-based mental health group that was running, and they put one of their support workers and counsellors in a breakout room, and people were able to tap out of the session if they needed one-on-one support or wanted to follow up, or if they felt that they'd been triggered. So people are really adapting to the technology and using it in very creative and useful ways to address some of the real life situations that happen in groups as well. So
yeah, great.
The next question is, Facebook is 24/7, but our group is only monitored Monday to Friday, and a young person posts something about self-harm on a Friday night, and other young people have commented, what safeguards should I consider to make this group as safe as possible?
Now, this one's interesting. This one actually came through early. And so this is one that I went, oh, that's an interesting question. There's lots of complexity in it. And I sat down and I talked to a couple of my colleagues, and we actually spent about 40 minutes, the three of us, talking about this, going, well, which way do we go and how do we do it? So with that, I've lost my train of thought completely. So I think with Facebook groups, work out if you want them at all anyway. So we would say if you're going to have a Facebook group, it should come off of your main organisation site rather than just a random one. And then on top of that, maybe if it was, I would have my normal Facebook account, but if I'm using it for here, I have Mandy Childwise or Sam Yakvik. We're using a new Facebook account we have for work only rather than a private one. I think we need to be really clear with our young people that how often it's going to be monitored. Are we going to be checking our Facebook page once a day, 10 times a day? Is it only 9 to 5? In sort of the announcement section of Facebook, you can put information. So you could put things in there about what to do in emergencies and different reasons, all the different outreach, all the different things that you would normally do. But if you see it, you've got a duty of care. You can't just ignore something if you do see it there. So probably, and again, I spoke to someone I work with, and they, you know, used to work with youth workers, and they said, well, when I manage them, if they saw that, I would expect a call. I would want that to be escalated so that we could work out what we needed to do in that situation. So if you are using a work Facebook group name rather than that, you won't accidentally see it if you're scrolling through on Saturday night. And if something like that does happen, of course, debriefing with all your young people about what we should do next time and how we can do it. So, you know, we're going to have more of this. I think we'll be using these groups more often. So we can't say no, but individuals always want really clear expectations.
Yeah. And look, just picking up and expanding maybe a little on that, it's there's a question here about, do we have a recommended protocol that might be different for online, following on from anything that we might see online that we think is a child protection concern? So is it worth organisations thinking about developing specific online forum-based protocols that fit within their child-safe sort of organisational approach?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Really specific, really clear. One of the links I've got at the end is the East Safety Risk Assessment, like the guide, the checklist of things to do. And, you know, work out what the protocols are with your young people. What are the rules? What do they think would be helpful? Certainly, if you talk to them, they completely understand that no one can watch this 24/7. So work with them to come up with a solution.
Great. And we'll make sure that the links are posted on the Yakvik page.
Great.
I love that. Can I just jump in and just add the last thing you said there, Mandy, about chatting with young people? Like, I think that is such a strong piece of advice in this. We are all dealing with new situations that we don't necessarily understand. We're learning all the time. And there's a bit of a vulnerability that we have to step into to say to young people, we're learning, we don't know all of the answers. And I think a strength comes from us admitting that and going through that process with young people. It also empowers them to consider what those risks and how to mitigate those risks, what that looks like, and being involved in it is part of the child safe standards. And so, yeah, thanks so much for bringing that up.
And also older young people, so the 15 to 18-year-olds, if you ask them to help come up with ideas of how we do this with younger people, they're so cautious. They don't want to cause harm. And it's so nice to see them go through that process.
Yeah, really great point, and a great way to again engage them and involve them in the process.
Yeah.
The next question is, and we are hearing this a lot at Yakvik, my organisation doesn't allow access to Zoom, and so I'm using my personal private Zoom account to continue my work. Am I putting myself and others at risk?
Yes. So I guess policies, procedures, they're boring. I get it. I have lots of them. You have lots of them. But they keep not only our children and young people safe, they keep us safe. So if your organisation has an expectation about what you should do, then that's what you need to be doing. If you think that's not current because they wrote that document 4 years ago, that's what I was saying, you need this extra guide. So you need to escalate up your chain and say, we need to move faster. This is not what's happening 24/7. This is not our 2020 now. So what can we change? But, you know, if anything was wrong, if there was an allegation against this person, you've already broken one rule by using something that your organisation has said no to. So you really need to stick with what's going on within your individual place.
Great. Sam, did you want to add anything to that or pick up on any of the sector concerns in regards to this?
Yeah, the only thing that I wanted to add particularly is there's been questions on Facebook as well that we can see. People are concerned about Zoom and people are confused about Zoom. There are certain organizations that are nervous to use it. There were concerns about privacy and safety, and to our end, we believe that they have been answered. There is now password enabled on by default. You've got the waiting room feature. You can turn off, you can lock meetings once everybody who's meant to be there can be inside. And so to my knowledge, there aren't still the concerns around the kind of Zoom doom, the Zoom bombing, and inappropriate people being in Zoom. One of the other things that's been coming up is around people showing their faces on Zoom or not showing their faces. And I think Mandy has touched on that a little bit already. And again, in that Batir resource that's come through, the e-safety resource that we've linked to a few times in the chat now, talks through a really interesting way to approach that, and suggests that young people, that it's a condition that young people share their video when they start the meeting so that everybody can be verified in terms of their identity. Then they have a conversation about what that's going to look like through the rest of the session. So Batir have set up a rule that if anyone takes their video down and doesn't respond to any communication for more than 3 minutes, I think it is, then they're going to reach out, and that's an agreement they've made by agreeing to be part of the workshop. That's not necessarily going to work for everybody's environment. It may not feel necessary to do that, but it's an interesting consideration to make. My personal preference is that we give people the opportunity to be able to turn off their video if they're in a position where they don't want to be seen, or it's not private or safe for them to do that in that way. But that is going to be an individual decision that you're going to need to make.
Okay. And are there any particular things, picking up on some of the chat around the privacy settings that people need to be considering in using Zoom or other online platforms? Some people were referring to the privacy concerns that were raised a few weeks ago quite publicly about the use of Zoom. Are there recommendations for how organisations might be able to, I guess, acknowledge this or let people know what those safety issues are that they've put in place before people sort of engage with Zoom?
Yeah, I mean, to my knowledge, they would use the recommendation. So Zoom have put out a few pieces now. They've put out some blog pieces and media releases that speak to all of this. I think it's going to be done on a judgment call as to whether that is safe enough for your environment. From our end, we have decided that it is, and Yakvik will be using Zoom. We use Zoom across our networks in the sector and with young people. Some places have taken a no Zoom approach, but I think it is, in my opinion, I think it's an extreme view to take based on the changes that they have made to their privacy and security. I don't think it's warranted anymore. I don't know whether Mandy or Derm, you have any differing opinions or any additional content?
Additional, I think, go back again to another policy. You've probably got a privacy policy. So make sure whatever you're doing is in alignment with your privacy policy, or does your privacy policy need to change? And I think when you're choosing platforms, schools are often using WebEx in Victoria. There's Zoom, my kids are using Seesaw, there's all these different things. That bit when you get something that says tick here to say you agree with the terms and conditions, it's probably worth reading those terms and conditions when you're doing something like this. Zoom has had 500,000 data breaches, so they have had instances of that kind of thing. But I do think they've worked really hard to fix a lot of the faults in the last few weeks.
Okay. Another question here. What do we do about kids who think everyone on the internet is a friend?
Yeah, and I think young kids especially, but even older people, what we would describe as a friend is different to young people. If you think of a stranger, if we're on the street, if I nodded to a jogger or the postie, my kids think that they're friends. They don't think that they're strangers, even though they're still strangers. I think some questions to sort of talk with young people about being online is, have you ever met them face to face because they're not a friend if you've never met them face to face. Have your parents met them face to face? Do you know their last name? Some of those things are sort of critical. How did you meet them? And how old are they, and which way did they sort of make contact with you? Again, I've got a friend and her daughter's just started high school where they're all friending left, right and centre on all these new platforms that they've never used before. And she had a conversation with her mum because there were two people that she didn't know. And she said, you know, what do I do? And I think you need to ask those questions, because young people, it's all about likes and it's all about those friends. So they're really looking to up their friend content to have more of them. So trying to help kids work out some questions to ask themselves might keep them safe.
Yeah, great. And that's good. And I guess it's a highlight around the inconsistencies or the changing nature of language and the way in which it can be sort of misunderstood by children and young people.
Certainly, just one thing too, when people play games, you know how you play games with people on the internet, perpetrators will give gifts and try and give you things in games to be closer, and then all of a sudden this person has been awesome for weeks and weeks and weeks in this game, so you think they're a friend, and we need to help kids understand that they're still not.
Yeah. There's, I'm going to take this one more as a comment, maybe something for Childwise and a few other organisations to follow up. Has anyone completed a risk assessment for Zoom? It would be a good resource to share. So I guess organisations have existing templates, and this person's recommending that maybe we take Zoom as a resource and apply the risk template and then share it with the sector. So maybe that's something for a few of us to follow up.
Yeah, and I've actually had a private message from someone saying that they're working on this and they're not in the position to share it. But my suggestion to them and hope would be that we could access that, de-identify it, and then share it with the sector and actually open it up for discussion, so people could add and comment and turn it into a bit of a kind of live resource and platform for discussion.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. That's great. There's another question here, and I don't know whether there are any resources, but there's a request for resources to teach young people about grooming and how to identify it, and how can they distinguish it from a person who's just building rapport.
Yeah, so I guess that's all part of protective behaviours or personal safety. We've got some information on our website. So there's a resources tab for parents on our website, which is a guide of how to have these conversations. It's across the country now, most schools, it's part of curriculum to start those things. And it's aged appropriate from really tiny all the way through high school, and talking about, you know, appropriate behaviours, how we feel in our tummy, how we feel in our body when things don't feel right, and the ways to look for things, and making sure that they find trusted adults to talk to. So there's lots of different tips, and definitely I think it's really helpful. We need to talk about this kind of thing with children and young people.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. So it's going back to the principles in a way, isn't it? And sort of where we say that for our work to be effective, we need to engage and talk with young people about how they might be able to make these distinguishing factors, and how they can actually look at some self-protective behaviour without.
Yeah, and as you know, as parents or leaders, we have no concerns at all about teaching kids about road safety, or not putting forks in toasters, or water safety, or anything else that will harm them. And the reason we don't with this is so many adults find it weird to talk about sex or abuse. Like, we've got the issue, not the children. My kids roll their eyes because mum is going off again talking about something that bores them to tears. So just if we start when they're young, it's normal, and it doesn't scare them.
Yeah, great. That was the last question, and I don't think that I have any more questions here. So if there's any other things that you want to add or point to resources, Mandy, before we wrap up. Oh, hang on, I've got a late breaker here. What would be the best way to communicate with a kid that is going through some online bullying and having issues with people that they may not know as well, and struggling with communication? What would be some helpful tips to have that that young person fully understand the risks and the dangers?
Yeah, so let me just share my screen while I'm talking. So I think bullying online, again, it's another growth area, which is awful to say, but it is. And we could spend a whole day doing stuff about cyberbullying and bullying online. eSafety have lots of information on there that could be helpful in this situation. Hopefully all your organisations have anti-bullying responses in place about what we do and what we should be teaching children, and my slides aren't moving, so I'm going to stop sharing. So that I guess we as adults also need to be role modelling correct behaviour on the internet. If you go onto Facebook, if you go onto any comments and read it, adults are appalling. We are not behaving the way what we would want to teach our young people to be. So lots of kids are almost accidentally bullying because they're just copying what they see us do. So it's part of a really broad conversation about it. But what we really want to encourage is that we try and give kids the confidence to speak up about it, which not every child will have, that parents raise the issue and organisations respond appropriately. Well, we talk to a lot of children in other organisations through our work, and one of the things they say is that bullying is handled so badly. Why would we tell anyone about abuse? If they can't fix this, they can't fix that. So it's a really key part of keeping kids safe is the strength of your anti-bullying policy.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, thank you.
That's the end of the questions, apart from the huge number of congratulations and thank you that are coming through for you, Mandy, but I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I'm sure people are going to be dropping off at the end now, but thank you so much for attending. I want to say a massive thank you to Mandy for giving up your time and considering questions in advance and on the fly and on the spot and all of the above and dealing with tech issues. We will be following up with a link to the recording of this. So anybody that wasn't able to join today will be able to do that in the future. We'll send out the presentation from Mandy and the links that we've been sharing through the chat feature as well. We're going to compile all the questions that we got that came through. I think we did get to answer most of them in one way, shape or form, but we will have a review of those, and if there's any we've left outstanding, we'll think about how we can get those answered. Let us know if you've got any extra questions. Please stay in touch with us. YACVIC is a member-based organisation. There'll be lots of people that are new to YACVIC on the webinar today. Please do check out our website, have a look at the work that we're doing, and consider joining us as members. We will be rolling out more of these webinars over time. They'll always be free for members, and Childwise are also delivering great webinars through their community of practice, which I can attest to being fantastic quality, well worth the price to join. And they also have some training sessions coming up, which I think are worth looking at. So jump onto our websites and keep in touch with us. And thanks so much for your time today. We'll finish up at 12:59.
Well done.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, team.